All right, hello everyone. I'm Daniel, and I'm very, very lucky to be talking with two of the designers of Arkham Horror the card game. And we've got Duke over here and Nick. And I'll ask you guys to introduce yourself and talk a little bit more, but just wanted to show that we're here at the Game Center in Roseville, Minnesota, and it's gonna be a good time. All right, let's get into introducing ourselves. So I'm gonna pass this over to Duke first. Tell me about who you are, how long you've been on the team for, and anything else you want to share.
Hey, I'm Duke Harris. I'm the lead designer for Arkham Horror, the card game. I have been with FFG for over 4 years at this point. I worked as an intern as well in 2019 on the Innsmouth Conspiracy, and you might know me from A Light in the Fog. And then later on, my first project I was lead on was The Feast of Hemlock Vale.
Excellent. Okay, and then we've got Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick. I got started with FFG 3 years ago now, just over 3 years ago. I started in July. My original work on Arkham Horror was with the freelance design for Murder at the Excelsior Hotel, which is very exciting. But then I didn't touch Arkham again until I got hired. I was just doing freelance for other FFG stuff, so yeah.
Yeah, wow. When was Murder? That was quite some time ago now, right?
Yes, Murder was, I remember Carcosa was what had just come out, and I believe Maxine was working on TCU at the time that I was working on Murder, so it would have been around 2018, I think.
Super. Yeah, one thing I want to talk about as we go along is like you guys have both been involved with the game before, now being kind of the core of the design team now. Now there's been some additions, of course, recently, but kind of what that's whole like. So it's exciting to talk about this. So I just want to talk about you as players, being players of the game before even becoming a designer, and how that's influenced now that you are a designer. So how would you label yourself as an Arkham player, and what does that even mean? There's lots of terms that people often use about, say, using Magic the Gathering terms. I'm not going to impose those on you. I just want you to use your own terms of what kind of player do you feel yourself as, and what's an example of an investigator or card interaction or just player card itself that kind of shows this idea off.
So I don't know. I know I've heard the terms of like Timmy, Johnny, Spike, and all that, but I can never remember which one's which. I consider myself, I'm really into, I build my decks around like 50% theme, like 50% cards that seem like they make sense for the character I'm playing, and then 50% jank. And so usually what that means is I find a card that fits with an investigator that maybe people don't play, and then I'm like, okay, how can I get this to work? How can I build around this? So that usually means that my decks are pretty awful, to be totally honest. But like, it's no secret that like my favorite, I love firearms in Arkham. I think they're really fun. I think the nuances between each one is very interesting. The shotgun has been my favorite since the core set. It's the kind of card that you build around, and it's a beautiful thing to do when you build a deck that really makes use of that weapon. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'm at. Theme and jank are my two things.
Any particular favorite investigators?
Oh yeah, Roland since the core set. I love Luke Robinson. And then more recently, Marion is great. Michael McGlenn is great. These investigators that seem pretty good on the surface, and then they have actually a lot of depth to how you can play them and capitalize on their abilities. So.
Do you buy into the whole kind of role on the team thing as being like you like to fight more? Do you like to be getting clues? Do you not really think about that going into your deck building?
I do think about that going into deck building. I've said before, and I still kind of stand by this, that I think Arkham is best at 2 or 3 players, because I like when everybody has to do a little bit of everything. I like to see different characters and classes have to account for every level of the game. 4 players is fun. I love it, but it takes a little longer, and having one person like, I'm going to do clues for everybody, and one person say, I'm going to do monsters for everybody, and then the other 2 people are like, I guess we'll flex. I guess we'll do what is needed at the time. Right. That's fun, and that has its own level of satisfaction, but I personally like it when people can pivot on a dime and see how the Mystic can handle both clues and damage in one game, that sort of thing. So.
I was going to ask about player count in a second. Let me ask Duke the same question, and then we'll kind of go back to that. All right, so back to you. Any particular label you have yourself as an Arkham player, or investigators, player cards that kind of show off what you like best about the game?
Well, I also don't really know the Timmy, Spike, Johnny, Brendan, whatever names there are for different kinds of players. I would say, if I was asked to give a descriptor, I would say I am a curious player. Both in how I play, I love to explore and I love to see different things. And in the decks that I build, I tend to veer toward raw efficiency and hitting the ground running, and also just leaning into jank and weird combos and having fun, just seeing how the cards can play off of each other. One of the things... Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
One of the things that I always liked about the Survivor class, for instance, was seeing how they broke the mold that some of the other classes kind of fit into. So that was always a class that I definitely gravitated towards a lot when I was a player. But I think I tend to just go for less straightforward investigators overall. I have a lot of fun just playing around with like, oh, what new mode of play does this offer me when I'm, experiencing Arkham?
Mm-hmm. So the player count question, before you came into the design team, what did you usually play at? Did you have a particular group that you were always working with? I don't know if you had friends that you were working with, or people at FFG, or the same kind of people. Was it mostly Nick, you said it was 2 and 3 player that you liked the best? Was that the group that you were more used to at the beginning?
I played, the vast majority of my games have been either true solo or two-handed. I play a handful of 2-player games here and there, but it's like I'm either by myself or I'm with a full group of 4, and that's the majority of my experience. And so that might be why it's, I prefer 2 or 3 players, because that's what I play the least. And so there's like this mystical element to it that's like, ooh, I never get to experience Arkham like this. But yeah, so I'm mostly solo.
My Forever Arkham group was a 3-player group, me and 2 of my best friends back in Chicago, which is where I started playing the game. And so I experienced like Carcosa and all the main campaigns in a 3-person group typically, at least the first time around. So I often would play like 2 or 3 players. Unlike Nick, it's kind of like a weird inverse. When I got into being an intern and playtesting and moving more towards design, of course, I would really emphasize more on 4-player and true solo. Like both of those are things that weren't where I came from, but things that I've had to appreciate and grow into and learn to design around as well.
Yeah, it's tough. I think people often talk about 4-player and true solo as like the weird experiences in terms of how the design works, because so many things scale so differently. I know this wasn't something I was anticipating talking about too much, but is there anything you want to talk about in terms of challenges for that? Because my experience also was I first was a 3-player group, and then I was doing 2-player a lot, and then I started to experience what 4 and solo was like. I was like, huh? Wait a minute. I have to build differently now. So now that you've experienced everything too, what changes for you?
I mean, I think Nick and I both now have to approach it from a perspective of we want each version of the game that people play to be compatible with what we're designing. Like, we want to design for a 1-player and a 4-player group and have it feel balanced throughout, which is definitely something I think to lean into further in future designs, where we want to accommodate for those player count differences.
Yeah, it's really easy, and you see this even a lot with scenarios that are already out, like ones that we played in Carcosa, where I've never played some of these scenarios 4-player before, and so then playing it 4-player, suddenly there's a lot more enemies in play, and the treacheries hit and combo on you a lot harder than what you're expecting, and the game is very different. And so building a deck that how I would normally build a deck, and then bringing it to a 4-player game, sometimes I just don't have the efficiency or the tools I need to accommodate for that level of scaling. And then conversely, on the solo side, it's easy to, like, there's a level of momentum that you need to have in a solo game, like because you're doing everything yourself. Nothing can really slow you down, or you can't let it. But at the same time, the encounter deck is moving a little slower, and so you have a bit more breathing room generally. So it is a really weird beast in that the scaling, you're right, the scaling is totally different between those. And that might be why I feel like 2 and 3-player is probably my favorite, because it's probably the most consistent experience.
One other thing that I would say is, thinking about the game's origins, this game was following on, in the same trail as the Lord of the Rings cooperative card game. And one thing that the Lord of the Rings doesn't have that Arkham does have is these consistent, linked, connected locations. Basically, Arkham has maps, and maps fundamentally change like how the game needs to be designed and balanced. And I don't know if that was maybe not as evident, especially in early Arkham when it emerged, but we've seen different designs and different campaigns play around with map sizes and such that make it clear that that is such a big impact on the core design of the game. And so that's one of the reasons for the boon of Hermes in that, recent ultimatum and refraction and boons. Giving solo players an extra movement actually feels a little bit more like a balance for how some of these new scenarios and how some of the campaigns have been designed, because it's so much easier to cover a map with four players as opposed to one player.
Yeah, you don't have to go to every location in 4-player. You can send some of the team somewhere. And man, when I played Lily Chen through Drowned City, and that was true solo, after I'd played the campaign before, you better believe I went with the route that picked Ruby, so I got the free movement. It's like, okay, I can do that. And yeah, it's interesting that some campaigns do some map scaling, some less so. I'm curious to see where that goes in the future, because it changes the experience. It's good not to do like the same thing every time too. So I like how we were all just playing Path to Carcosa yesterday, where you're talking about the comboing from the encounter deck that happens. So often people say that 4-player is a lot easier because you can do all these things with specialization. You can move around the map in unique ways, but at the same time, those I forget the name, the counter card, Haster's Grasp or something, right? It's testing willpower to the number of Doom in play, and you're like, wait a minute. Usually this is like 2 or 3, but we just drew 2 Spires of Carcosa, and now I'm testing like a 5 or 6. So all right, in that case, I get to fail a little bit more in this case, but I'm balanced out by my teammates in some way. So it is interesting to see that the scaling, it's balanced in different ways, right? Yeah. It's not just this is unequivocally harder or easier, but it challenges you in new ways that you might not appreciate. Okay, let me go on to my next real question. So maybe this is actually related. Is there a take or opinion or idea about the game that you've seen online or by others that you feel like doesn't really match what you know about the game, and you want to like say something about that? And maybe it's also kind of a question of like, as a designer, how do you deal with some of these different play styles that are not your own?
So when it comes to online opinions, I do like to. I don't keep abreast of everything, but every so often I'll be like, "What's Reddit saying about Drowned City? What's Board Game Geek saying about Drowned City?" And I'll just peek in and take a look, and everybody has opinions, and that's great. And obviously we know that we can't design for everybody. We want each campaign to hit its goals, our goals for that campaign, whatever they are, first and foremost. And we know that people will enjoy it overall. But one opinion I noticed of Drowned City was that there's some people that think that Sepulchre of the Sleeper is the quote-unquote like canon ending or true ending. I don't necessarily feel that at all. I didn't feel that when designing it. I definitely designed it with the idea that most people aren't going to see it, and I want to deliver an experience that is memorable and also feels appropriate given the circumstances, and that translated into really hard. So if you're like, oh, they made the canon ending so hard, that's not. If you see it as a canon ending, great for you, but I definitely did not while I was designing it. On the subject, you answer.
I was just going to piggyback off of what you said about that. The true canon ending of the Drowned City sees Cthulhu coming to Arkham and laying waste, and the investigators like sealing him away. Like that is the true canon ending that you can take as the story going forward. But yeah, please go back.
Well, and now what was the other part of the question? Things that builds or strategies that we've seen people do that I never thought of or whatever. I didn't. One, working with Duke, he and I build decks very differently. So I got a little bit of that there, but even more so, during the stream that we did right at the beginning of ArkhamCon, we had Reed, our new designer, on there. And watching him play his deck with Joe Diamond and the ancient stones, I think was what it was, and he's testing intellect at like 18 regularly, and I was like, oh my god, like maybe shrouds need to be a little higher, maybe we need to do like 8 shroud location, which obviously we don't. That was a reactive feeling. Those are called intrusive thoughts. You don't listen to those. But it was a shock to me because I do some stat ball decks, but never like that. So I was very impressed with his build and how he was running it.
So piggybacking on that, it's cool having Reed as someone who's been part of the community and now more recently and now on the design team. Or I don't know how much you guys watch other people play after the product has been released. I'm sure playtesting involves some of that in some respect, but have you been surprised by anything else like that where people are playing in a way that was like, I mean, you can do this, but that wasn't really the intent of how the game, not just scenarios per se, but how you want the game to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like
Sure.
where there's something where you're saying, yeah, you can play this way and that's very fun, but sort of the spirit of what I'm trying to do, the experience I'm giving is maybe something different and you're surprised by that.
Well, in general, I feel like but when I was a player, and a playtester, I looked at the taboo and FAQ, specifically the taboo, as a way of balancing the game. But in a lot of ways, I feel like some play groups will self-balance. Like when I was originally a player, I'll say when Key of East came out in the final pack of Carcosa, because I was playing in the Mythos pack model at that time, I was like, I'm putting this in my deck. And I did, and I played the finale, I think, as Mark Harrigan. That was my first playthrough of Carcosa. And I was operating at +3 on all of my stats, or whatever it was, something ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And I finished it, and I was like, well, I'm never playing that again. Because it was too powerful. And I think we've said that with the taboo, is some cards, what MJ said to me in some of our last conversations as designers, fellow designers, was you're always going to design cards that are too powerful. You're always going to design cards that are underpowered. Blood of Thoth. That just happens, and part of it is seeing how the community, like, we're only getting a small fraction of a percentage of playtesting and experience of what these cards do in our own environment. We cannot anticipate like the myriad connections and the myriad combos that will emerge through the community taking what we've done. The idea, our hope, is that we can present these tools and present these cards as pieces for players to go wild with and have fun with and imagine, but that also means that there are going to be weird interactions or things that truly you can't all account for in playtesting.
Let me ask the reverse question, which is, are there things that the community is missing that when you see people talk about the cards, or maybe if you've watched playthroughs, that you're like, well, they haven't discovered this, or they're missing some sort of power of the cards, when often we talk about the cards and there's like consensus on power levels, but maybe there's something that we're missing. What are we missing?
So I teased on, I can't remember where it was, what interview or what panel it was, but I teased this idea that there's a Marion build out there that I haven't seen people talk about a whole lot, that is my favorite build. I gave it, so Scott Armstrong from Mythos Busters was playing through a campaign. He's like, Nick, I'm going to play Marion. What do you suggest? He's like, do you do Book of War 1-2 Punch? I was like, I don't. This is what I do. And I gave him my build, and he's like, this looks really fun. And he took it and ran with it, and he loved it. I will share that here, because I've seen a couple people start to like dig into it. I do Gunslinger Marion. I go one-handed firearms, and just all the events that play into that. And so, unfortunately, the downside is that it turns her signatures into like just useless cards. But the fun and the jank and of bouncing those handguns in and out of play, of capitalizing on the Remington and its secondary ability, it's unmatched. Like, is it as consistent as 1-2 Punch Book of War? Not always, but you can kind of stretch that damage out over a long period of time, and if you actually get multiple upgrades on the Remington, it can be very, very powerful. So I love that deck. And so to those of you who found that on your own, great job. To those of you who said Prime for Action is a useless card and why would we run it, I challenge you to put it in Marion and play it that way. So.
God, I mean, I can't think of much off the top of my head. I mean, one of the reasons that we tabooed Underworld Market in advance was because Lucius with that card is stupidly ridiculous. I mean, anyone with Underworld Market is kind of ridiculous. I used it in my Alessandro deck yesterday. But no, beyond that, like, I can't say anything off the top of my head.
What was it? Was it pickpocketing, or what was he pulling out of the Underworld Market that gave you the chills?
I mean, just everything. There's a raw efficiency to it. I mean, it's a great card in that it lets you take potentially 10 key cards out of your deck and have access to them within the first 5 rounds of the game, 10 rounds if you've run through the entire thing. It does come at the cost of some resources, but at the same time, having that access is really strong.
I totally agree. Like, I feel like community members at large kind of miss this idea of the fun of the game is putting together this kind of stuff, you know? I mean, I'm nothing against people who want the raw power all the time, but people who poo-pooed Katana, I gotta say, that is a fun card to play with. I don't know if there's something coming in the future where people, when it was released, they said, I don't get it. And don't comment on that, but I can tell you that recently I found a good home for it in Charlie Kane.
Oh, sure.
Because he can run the Seeker stuff as well. And it's kind of fun. Like, I enjoy putting together decks where the card that got dumped on shines a little bit. So I appreciate putting in some little pieces of candy for people to pick up eventually.
Weirdly, Katana was, I think, a first taste of an archetype that I wanted us to explore and still want us to explore further of precision in the game. Granted, it's kind of weird that we tease it in Guardian, which precision is more of a Seeker kind of purview, in my opinion. And so, like, obviously, Roland can play into that archetype, and Joe, hilariously. So yeah, like that's an example of a card where sometimes we'll play around with the concept and we're like, okay, we're going to play around a lot more with this later on, or we want to see this kind of get teased out. But again, when you see those initial like breadcrumbs, it's just a small offering and you don't necessarily see the entire body of cards that it will complete the idea.
Is that hard as designers to tease things and have the box stand on its own, knowing that, hey, there's something missing here that you didn't get yet?
Well, I think I can say all 3 of the designers on the Arkham team now are DMs, and there's nothing more fun to a DM than smugly watching as people flounder and theorize and wonder about like what's to come. You know, not that like that's my favorite thing, but obviously like encouraging that kind of speculation and seeing people interacting and digging into that is very satisfying for us. And also hopefully a source of what we want to be, joy for the community to start theorizing and imagining.
Yeah, sometimes it's intentional where there's this idea of like, we're playing with this idea of a theme. Let's get this version or this example or this piece of it out first and see how people react to it, and see what their takes are on it. And sometimes it's unintentional and it's like, this is a cool ability that I really like that I put on a card, and we put it out there, and then it's like, I bet we could do more with that. I bet we could take that and expand on it a little bit. So it kind of goes both ways in that regard.
All right. My next question I think we've already been talking about, but maybe just more on strategy, whether it's deck building or gameplay itself. Is there anything about the game in that sense that is underrated or underappreciated in your opinion? Again, kind of reacting to community, how people play the game as far as you know, and the other side, like overrated or exaggerated, that you want to put your own 2 cents on?
That's a tough one, thinking about deck building and what people overrate or underrate. It's funny because there's a handful of cards that I'm like, people run this? And they're stellar cards, and everyone's going to think I'm awful at the game, which you should. But things like Backpack Level 2, Geared Up even, obviously before we tabooed it. These are cards that I looked at and I was like, man, I don't need those. And then I find out they're in so many decks. And they're really good. Like they're just good cards. There's no reason not to run Backpack if you have a bunch of items or supplies or whatever. So if you would ask me, I'd say yeah, they're overrated. But really, that's more just me speaking to my own poor perspective. So.
Yeah, thinking about that, I think about sometimes you don't necessarily expect how the community is going to value certain cards. I was in Card Council, like a final approvals for the Dream Eaters cards, and I remember, or actually no, that was for Edge of the Earth. God, wow. And I remember looking at that and being like, how is 3 experience really going to be worth 2 trauma to people? And as it turns out, it's worth it to everyone to trade 2 trauma for 3 starting experience, because that also enables weird play with a card like Versatile. being able to start off with new weird pet cards in your deck. As far as like what the community like overemphasizes or overvalues, I would again come back to the idea of efficiency. I think one of the things that you said earlier this weekend really struck me. The fact that you liked the great work and the Lost Homunculus. I've seen people scoff at that card and be like, well, it's not enough XP, it's not worth it. But that's not the point. The point was not that you get XP from the card. The point is that there's that risk that introduces, and that risk can create an interesting story moment. And that's what is important to us. That's what I design around. Obviously, it's fun to play around with combos, synergies, and mechanics. But at the end of the day, what you are creating in Arkham Horror isn't just like an average card game. You're not just playing the most efficient way, you're creating a story, you're playing into a narrative. And I think that is what the strength of the game is, even if the players who I find arguing and going back and forth about how efficient X card is, I think everyone is playing this game for that narrative. So that's something that I think is not necessarily talked about, but that is almost even implicitly understood in how people are interacting with the game.
I really like how you put that. That makes a lot of sense to me. That we choose our decks, our investigators, not for we want to win the campaign, end of story, right? But we choose them as part of they're our surrogate in the game, right? This is us expressing ourselves, our creativity in the deck building, in the gameplay, and some role playing there too. But yeah, that's the experience that I think people don't talk about as much. And maybe people like me who play the game a lot, we can lose that. But I know people who they play with their group once every couple weeks, and they get much more invested in their investigator and their deck, and can see that story better than someone who's I'm balancing 6 decks at once, and when you play the next scenario, you're like, what did I put in here again? I'm sure when you're playtesting, you might experience that too, but the emergent narrative part of the game that is from the scenarios, but also from your decks, is very important to me as well. Anything you want to add, Nick?
No, I would just agree that I think that the efficiency part is important to the discussion and to the design of cards. We definitely don't want to make a bunch of cards that are just so below the curve because they're fun and interesting, but also not really worth including in your deck that you end up losing a bunch of scenarios. This is striking a balance between the two. But I do agree with Duke that I think sometimes the conversation can shift too far into the efficiency side of it, where then it's like, well, why would I run this card when there's this other one from 4 cycles ago that's just better? Yeah. Or that just does what it does cheaper or more easier or less setup or whatever. And so it's finding that balance to express similar mechanics in different ways that play to different experiences.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's hard to avoid that, right? Every card has to be different, right? Otherwise, and then, yeah, looking back to old cards, I'm sure we'll briefly touch on this again, but just having 10 years of the game makes it impossible to have everything perfectly balanced, so to speak. But yeah, even like with the great work, when people talk about, okay, I'm going to run my Dexter deck that has literally every XP gaining card, it's like, cool, you can do that, that's cool, but I don't think that was the intention for those cards to just stack up and say this is the only experience you can have with the game.
Right.
All right, let's. Sure.
One thing I wish we could go back in time, but I wasn't necessarily designing all the cards when some of these came out. But thinking about like Down the Rabbit Hole and Arcane Research and like something like the Great Work, I wish we'd had some way to limit and be like, there's only one, I don't know, call it a pact or contract per deck, where it's like you're choosing sort of the narrative of your deck at this baseline in how so that when you're playing it. Not saying that that's necessarily what we would ever do, but that's something that comes to mind when we make new cards like that. Sure. And something that actually, we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but that limited and current and legacy environments kind of introduce the idea that we don't have to assume that players are always going to have all 3 of these XP boosting cards and balancing around that.
Yeah, bouncing off of that comment about, I don't know, whatever way you would talk about the XP gaining cards, Arkham is different from other games in that deck building itself is so open, right? It doesn't tell you need to have X number of economy cards or X number of weapons, and I think that frees you to make investigators that want different numbers of things.
Smaller day,
Right. But at the same time, I think with the number of cards in the whole card pool, you can do some very efficient things like every card in my deck just draws other cards, right? Whereas at the beginning, at the beginning of the game, like there only was preposterous sketches or whatever else, and now the density of such good stuff. Does that put things? I don't know. I want to say out of whack, but does that change things when you're designing investigators or thinking about decks in general to see like, are people running X number of the various tools I can get, or with a larger card pool, they can just load up on things like card draw or fast economy?
It doesn't really, I mean, I have an eye to it to a degree, but I kind of touched on this during our dev panel the other night too here at ArkhamCon, but I would run into sort of like a paralysis of indecision or of choice, because there's so many things that if I just design, like, I'm just going to throw an ability out there, after you discover a clue, I don't know, draw 2 cards, like simple, very simple ability. If I were to then take that and be like, all right, what can break this in the entire history of the card game? That's such an endeavor to look at all that different stuff, like fast clue getting, what's really good for drawing during your turn, etc. Like, so it's one of those things where it's like I kind of have to design what feels good for the investigator, what feels good for the theme that we're going for, the mechanics, and then with an eye to probably some of the more popular ones, the ones that I think about first, like preposterous sketches, like working a hunch for those specific situations. And then also maybe look at 1 or 2 that I'm like, what could work with this investigator that people don't often run? How would that influence the deck? But to be like, well, I built this investigator and now we're going to see a deck of 30 cards that all get clues and draw cards. I mean, honestly, that's just Seeker anyway. Yeah. So like, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Anything to add, Duke?
Actually, kind of to push something that Nick was kind of touching on forward, rather than answering your question directly.
That's fine.
I mean, I often think about kind of maintaining a sharpness to the design in Arkham. When we are designing cards, if we are designing a specific treachery around a specific investigator with, this is manageable for everyone except this one investigator. I'm thinking specifically of Patrice. And Captivating Clean. MJ herself was like, Duke, why don't you write it this way? And I was like, that's not the perfect simplicity that we had in like Dunwich. And you know what? I'm okay with us having a campaign that's going to be harder for a certain investigator, because then it becomes a challenge and it becomes a way of thinking. Like, there are certain investigators who are going to have a hard time in the Forgotten Age. There are certain investigators who are going to have a hard time in TCU with certain other elements, right? So we can't, in some ways, it's almost an intentional, it's an intentional sort of imperative to ignore some of those softening elements in the interest of keeping the game the kind of sharp and clear version of it that I think players have fallen in love with, and that requires the players to play these decks and to care about how they're deck building, right?
Okay, let's almost done here. I want to just sort of touch on the idea that the game's been around for so long. We've been talking about it for a while. It's nearly 10 years old, I think. It's probably been in development for that long, at least. What impresses you about the game and its design to this day? And is there anything that you would go back and change in hindsight, or nudge in one direction or another, given the long history of the game?
I am continuously impressed with the versatility that this game can easily handle, the many different myriad situations that you can represent in an Arkham scenario. The system is robust. It has depth to it, but it doesn't feel overly complicated to me. Like, at its core, it's relatively simple. It's only when you get into the nuanced effects playing off each other that complexity comes out. So I'm continuously impressed at all the different things that we can represent on Arkham cards, and that's so exciting. And I forgot the second half of the question.
Anything you'd go back and say, okay, we could change that a little bit to make it more updated for your vision of the game now?
That's a really tough one, because I am in love with the game as it is. So there's very little that I think should be changed or could be changed for the better. I think there's some wording consistencies that could be cleaned up. Things that we used to write cards one way in Dunwich and Carcosa that now we write them differently in Hemlock and Drowned City, and that creates some inconsistencies. Or with it creates the implication that those effects work differently when maybe we didn't intend them to.
Yeah.
Little things like that, but that's just a product of the game being almost 10 years old, and just the way cards are written and the way we think about cards changing in that time. Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to answer that one without also then getting into things that we might be thinking about for the future. So
Yeah, one thing I love, and this is just, again, the game has been around a long time. There's nothing you can do about this, but since Kate came out, right, we now say that clues on assets count as clues under your control, right, for Kate to work. And then you look back at some of the older campaigns that give you, so I'm thinking of the Forgotten Age, right, where you get the custodian, I believe, in the City of Archives, and you have to put your clues on the custodian as a way of tracking progress, and then you take control of the custodian. Well, now you got these clues back. Like, that's not supposed to happen. But at the same time, who cares, right? That's just, you can play it a different way, or you can play it as the new rules are. Like, it's a co-op game still, so using your best judgment, I think, is good there. But it's interesting to see those sorts of, okay, now that doesn't happen anymore. Now you just place resource tokens to mark that kind of thing.
And actually, the custodian ability, I think, is a really good example of something where it's like, when this was designed, the intent didn't need to be made clear. It was rules as written, it's this, this, and this. But the new card, of course, comes in and upends that. So we're left with this situation where it's like, do we need to just, like, we obviously always want to adhere to rules as written, but the rules as written were correct when that card was designed, and the rules as written now have this weird inconsistency that forces us to be like, do we go back and we errata all this stuff, or do we just expect the players, or do we ask the players to think about the original intent with which the card was written? Which is always a hard ask, because people do want things defined very clearly, and we get so many rules questions of people who want things defined absolutely clearly, even things and even situations that involve players making choices that they would never actually make in a game. we get questions from people asking, well, what if I did this thing for this thing? And sometimes I'll be like, well, why would you do that? No one would do that. You're just trying to decide when the cart will flip through, or will clip through the environment and let you cheese the Rainbow Road race, right? This is a question of technical nature.
What happens if Luke Robinson is in his his gate and the Harbinger of Illusia spawns? Yeah, I gotcha.
That one in specific. I mean, I think Nick and I can both say Luke Robinson is so cool, and he also introduces so many rules questions.
yeah, he does.
Is it worth it? Yes, I think it's worth it, but also it's always going to create these weird situations where we have to also trust the players to, like, okay, you're at the table, you don't need to stop playing, use the Grim rule or whatever, but just keep playing the game. If you played it wrong, play it again later on with the right ruling and see how it feels then. At the end of the day, this is a cooperative game. It's not like we have to come in and judge the fairness of a situation and be like, this is how this must be. If you're just around the table playing with your friends, play it how you can to the best of your abilities and understanding of the game. And then, of course, like, incorporate what you learn into future plays. But as Nick said, like, Arkham is a very simple game in kind of its concept, but it is mechanically very complex and very crunchy. There's so much going on. And actually, to kind of segue back into your original question of what the game introduces, I would also agree with Nick in that we have so much room still to explore new spaces. I would say that there are products coming out where we're playing with things I never would have imagined before that are really exciting. And that is my hope for the future of this game, is that we can still keep pushing the envelope and keep showing players something new that they haven't seen before with every new release.
Yeah, I mean, I'm impressed by the game every day. I feel like I've played hundreds of games, and I still see something new. Most times that I play, I'm like, did everything I think about this game, is it all wrong? And I mean, that impresses me about the game. It's just, it's so, Nick, you mentioned about how the game can express so many different things. The cards can be a train, the cards can be, the interior of a house, it could be locations across the world. and it just works, right? I mean, you have to suspend your belief a little bit when people say they play telescopic sight and shoot from one city to the next. But who cares, right? That's part of the fun, I think, of imagining what's really going on in these cases. So the bones of the game are still very, very strong. All right, let's move on. So you both had been players before. What have you learned about the game, or maybe about the game's development specifically, now that you've joined the design team? So let's see the bigger picture of how the game actually gets made. Is there anything that you'd like to share to help those of us who don't get to see the inside of those rooms?
When the game started, it was obviously Maxine and Nate who did the core set. And in talking with Nate was like, well, I was there to kind of like provide input here and there, but largely Arkham was Maxine's design. And I think it remained that way for a very long time, where Maxine was the voice of Arkham, was the one deciding its trajectory, where it was going to go, what it was going to do, what content it was going to handle as far as source material. And that still is largely the case, and you can probably correct me if I'm wrong, Duke, but my perception of how it used to be was that Maxine would just decide product by product. What do I want to do next? I'm going to do this next. And now we're thinking much further ahead as a team. When Maxine got started, Arkham didn't have a producer, and we have a producer now, and all the benefits that come with having a producer. We are able to think further ahead. There's things we don't have to worry about that Maxine probably had to stress about all the time, as far as little deadlines that you are easy to forget, and then all the different gateways and checks that have to happen to make sure a product reaches final form and is ready for release. We don't have to think about that probably in the same way that Maxine did. And that is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that we get to focus on design, and it's a curse in that we kind of lose sight of the larger picture sometimes, at least speaking for myself, lose sight of the larger process when all we really have to worry about is the design side of it. So
that is one thing where I think I will slightly contradict you, Nick, in that there was, I know from my experience as an intern and from my experience with Maxine, there was always kind of a forward-thinking line plan. There's always an idea for here's what the future could be.
Sure.
But I think one of the switches that I pushed for when I came in as lead was that I want each of the designers working on this line to have whatever they're working on be a passion project. I think designers design better when it's something that they care about, something that they intensely, not always intensely, but that they love, that they enjoy. And that's kind of informing how we approach projects and new products going forward.
Is there a particular stamp signature that we can see on the scenarios or projects, the passion projects that you each have worked on?
I would say I like monsters. I love monsters. The baby Deep One hatchling and the Deep One nursemaid. Yeah. That was something that was very fun to me when I imagined A Light in the Fog. Like I got to lead, I got to push for what I wanted to see and the treacheries and the enemies in that scenario and what I wanted it to feel like. And that continues in Hemlock. I loved dreaming up horrifying monsters and drawing inspiration from various sources, but at the end of the day, it was just fun to imagine what this environment would look like. And that will carry forward into, I think, anything else I bring. I always want to bring as awesome as monsters as I can in front of the players.
Mm-hmm. So all of those scenarios with monsters, that's you, or is it the?
Well,
Nick also likes monsters, but of course, I think the way Nick is going to design and imagine monsters is different for me. So I think as more time passes, you'll be able to see and kind of look at and be like, oh, well, this is more Nick's style, or this is kind of what came out of his imagination. The Inescapable is one that I think of in specific.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about the Inescapable. You talked about it a bit before, but also it comes sort of in the Drowned City paired with all of these other star spawns. Did you work on have a favorite one, or did you work on all of them together? How did that work? Because I think that's super interesting to get this random one or two into each scenario.
Sure. Nick definitely pushed for. I'll let Nick speak for himself about the star spawn. I would say my favorite one. I had fun with. I think I wrote the briefs for the 3 new art pieces we had for the other star spawns. One of them I wanted to kind of invoke Koss from Bloodborne, this idea of this kind of bright cosmic look. But my absolute favorite from that set is the coral star spawn. I wanted to imagine, like when I imagined that creature, I imagined it as having fallen asleep just in the streets of Relais when it sank, right? And that the years and years and years of just lying asleep at the bottom of the ocean, coral grew up over it, so that when you see it, it's actually pulled itself. If you look at the art piece, it's pulled itself away from the wall, and you can kind of see the imprint of where it pulled itself away.
That's really cool. I like that. Okay, Nick, I didn't ask you the earlier question, but if you want to first address the star spawns or any other stamp or signature you have on the game.
I will say that Duke and I design very differently, but I think that we both, our ideas are expressed in unique ways. Duke loves to push the envelope and really test the boundaries of what Arkham can do, and I really admire that about him. There's been times where I'm like, Duke, you're using so many cards to do this thing, and he's like, I know, but it's so cool. And then we play it, and I'm like, oh my god, it is so cool. And I kind of work from the opposite, where I like the boundaries to be there. The first question I have when I'm working on a product is like, okay, what's my card space, and how do I need to divide that up per scenario, per class, whatever that looks like, whatever we're working on. And so, like, I like to take what Arkham does and refine it to fit the themes that I'm working on. And Duke is like, I want Arkham to do something totally new. And I think both of those sensibilities complement each other really well. As far as the Star Spawn, I love monsters. I love kaiju. I love big dumb brutes. Yep. So the monstrous Star Spawn was one I'm like, this guy needs to feel monstrous. He needs to feel like a big brute that just shows up and wrecks your day. Like, he's a cudgel. He's a blunt force instrument. And then also the Inescapable, which was my idea. Like, from concept of Drowned City, I had the idea for the Inescapable in my head. And so he was there from day one. And I'm so happy that he's still in the game. I'm like, what about one that just doesn't die and is always there? Yeah. And then halfway through development, we're like, well, okay, what if you can kill him for real, though? Like, what if there is a way to do it? And so then we built that into the Grand Vault, which was fun. The opportunity for investigators to get their comeuppance on him. I love both of those.
Yeah, one thing I really appreciate about Drowned City is it gives you all of these stretch goals and things to replay and try again and see what happens if you do this. And I don't know whose idea that was, or if that was part of the whole, original version you'd mentioned, I think, the other day about it was maybe kind of a Metroidvania at one point, if that was part of it. But there's so much to go back and try again or try a different way. This is a tough question, but when you design the game, how much of playing for the groups that just play once do you have to think about versus the people who are crazy and come to places like ArkhamCon who play the campaigns over and over again? Because I think that there's a lot of value in the game itself. I mean, like monetary value when you play it more than just the one time through. But I know that people have large board game collections that they don't play everything, and they can't afford to just play something over and over again. They have to get through other games. What's that like as a designer to think about?
One of the core tenets for me as a designer has always been replayability. As far back as Murder at the Excelsior Hotel, I was like, I'm just making one scenario. I want it to be one that people want to play over and over again and get something new out of it every time. And that holds true to this day. I feel like if I can make something that is not just fun in one experience, but makes people want to come back and experience it again, maybe a little differently, maybe make different choices, then I think I've done my job as a designer. I don't really, unfortunately, think about the people who play it once and then maybe put it on their shelf for a while. Like, my goal is to even those players to then be like, well, maybe in a couple weeks I'll come back to it and try a different thing I didn't do. Or if it's a scenario you only play at cons, like I played it last year and I did this, but there's something I didn't experience, so I'll play it again at the next Gen Con or next ArkhamCon or whatever. That's my goal.
I think it's really a strength of the design, especially with the big box sets now, to have more of that. I will say that when my group first played the Scarlet Keys, and we had played all the other campaigns before, it was the first and only time where after finishing the last scenario we said, let's play again. And we immediately went back, building decks to see some new stuff that we hadn't seen before. And I know that open world format is challenging, but that was, I don't know how we all landed on that as agreement of we want to do this again. It was so much fun. But also because there were so many breadcrumbs that y'all had left in the campaign guide and these scenarios themselves.
I have a twofold answer. I mean, I guess first and foremost, I always try to think about what the moment of that blind play is something you only get once, and like, you know, if you're listening to this, then obviously you played the core set, and nothing like you. A formative experience for any Arkham player is when the Ghoul Priest comes out. You don't know the game. You've just been staggering your way through like a very simple scenario up until that point, and suddenly it's putting you in a situation where you have a problem that is a big problem, right? And that moment of like surprise is something that players will remember, and that also brings them back to the game. So like I think about in Hemlock, spoilers for Hemlock, when the bear comes out, like that was always a moment where I was like, I want people to remember this moment and remember this thing, partially because I think the art's so cool, but also like that was what the scenario should feel, is that you are on your back foot, that you were caught off guard, and what do you do now? And asking Arkham players to step up to that makes all of the cool deck building and makes all of the preparations that you do and you think about worth it. You should be rewarded for caring about how your character plays and playing that character well. But also part of the fun of that is having to play reactively to something that is forcing you on your back foot. Now for the other bit that I would say is I play a lot of roguelikes. I love to go back for a game like Inscription or Hades or Binding of Isaac. I played Binding of Isaac so much. And every time you play those games, you're always getting kind of a random experience. So that probably leads to some of the randomness that I tend to emphasize in my scenarios, in that, you know, I play roguelikes, and if I lose a run, I'm like, that sucked. I can't wait to see what happens next time I go back with different stuff. And so while I want players to I want every blind play to be memorable and cool, I think the big box format allows us to play around with that flexibility. Like when I was a teenager, I lived in a place where I couldn't go to a game store and just pick up new games. I had an N64 and The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask. And I played Majora's Mask over and over again, and each time I played it, I got something new, and I learned how to like navigate the world and got to know everything very closely, which is what led to Hemlock and the idea that like I want players to feel like there's so much more that they can come back to, but that if you're playing it for the first time, you'd leave it being like, okay, I have no idea what would have happened if I had followed this, or this, you know?
All right. These are some awesome answers, guys. This is really enjoyable for me. So just to finish up, there's kind of two last things that feel free to answer however you can or want to, but just things I'm curious about if you want to share with listeners, with viewers. All right, so clearly for a little while, the community's been wondering about the current limited legacy environments that have been introduced. And I know that they're still kind of in flux. This has not been officially released. We have a beta that has been given in the latest FAQ. What can you tell us, or what would you like to share, given maybe some of the community reactions so far that maybe you want to correct or adjust, or just share?
Well, I mean, one thing that we've often, like, that has been emphasized to me since stepping onto design was the idea that, like, can you play this expansion that you're making with just the core box and maybe this new investigator expansion that's accompanying the new campaign, right? And so that was an emphasis that we even had playtesters and tried making things ourselves. Products were playtested with that perspective in mind. And I think with where the game's at and certain products being unobtainable to certain players, we can no longer assume that everyone has the bread and butter cards in, say, Dunwich Legacy or Path to Carcosa. And so when we are designing, we have to design with this present, like with the, okay, well, if you went into a store and you have these products on the shelves, what can you play with? Like, how does a deck look like if you only have these 3 expansions, right? And so when we design the investigators also, like, usually you'll get a bunch of pet cards for an investigator and expansion, and that's kind of for a good reason, because you should be able to play that investigator out the box with their fun toys. So as far as current and limited goes, and legacy, we always want the game to be playable at any amount of cards or level of investment that you have. Yeah, I guess that's...
Anything to add, Nick?
I don't think so. I think Duke covered it pretty well. I'm excited to see, particularly with the limited format, what people do when they're like, well, I just want to use this, this, and this, and you can kind of create a current format tailored to the experience you want or the challenge that you want. That's what I'm excited for in the future.
Looking back at older, kind of to your point about looking at different sets from before and building your own current of 3 or whatever the number is boxes, is there anything you noticed by looking at that, wondering about like earlier campaigns or rather investigator cards and saying, well, what were these for? Who were they made for? Because I've often wondered, I really agree with what you said about Duke. Duke, the newer sets for sure have a lot of pet cards in them. And then sometimes I look back to you say bread and butter cards from Dunwich and Carcosa and say, was this for Safina? I don't know. Have things changed in the design process since then to include more toys for the investigators that they're paired with?
I think it's kind of been a natural thing about the length and the amount of time and the amount of space that we've had to explore with investigator expansions. Investigators have become more and more specialized isn't really the right word, but their abilities have become more and more focused. Whereas maybe earlier in the game's life, they could be broader. And where someone comparing like Roland to Marion, and they both have relatively simple abilities. Marion not as much, but they lead the investigator in different directions. And so when you have, or I guess a better example would be Roland versus Carson. Carson is a very focused investigator. You play him a very specific way, whereas Roland is much more broad. And so to support that specific mode of play, there's probably some, and there were cards that existed before that fit with Carson, but Scarlet Keys had to introduce a collection of cards specifically for him, not just to make sure that he was good out of the gate, but to make sure that he was supported and that you could build a deck with him. And I think that's just a natural element of just how long the game has been a thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's move on to the last thing, which I'm very curious about how the balance looks between when you are working on things like the FAQ, the taboo list as part of that, any of these rules questions that have come out, but where you're looking backwards, right? You're looking back at older cards that you've already designed where you're not selling anything new anymore, right? How much time can you spend on looking at older products compared to working on newer things? And what's that process like of going through the taboo list and FAQs? Is there a lot of playtesting that's done for those? What does that look like? Because that's never something I've heard anything about.
A lot of the taboo and FAQ comes from conversations we are having and conversations that we are seeing take place. The rules questions, obviously the FAQs are frequently asked questions. So if we're noticing like, okay, we go to Alex, who's our incredible rules specialist. She not only manages the Arkham rules questions, but also the Marvel Champions questions, and she's navigating fielding so many questions every day. And so we'll go to her and be like, what are the things that you're seeing, that you're getting so many emails about? What are the things that players are introducing, new things for players? And those become eligible questions for FAQs and taboos. They prompt questions of like, oh, this causes problems with X, Y, Z other cards, or this other card that's coming out, maybe we really are kind of going off of the assumption that we will have to nerf this previous card that maybe makes it broken. Yeah, that's how I'd answer that.
Okay. Nick, anything to add?
Taboo stuff is largely like we look at how impactful the card is being in the current meta. And luckily, I think we've gotten to a point where we feel we don't have to taboo as many cards as often, but obviously every expansion introduces a whole new set of variables that it can change that at any time. But as far as testing, like we do test those. Like, it doesn't get as much of a focus as like a product does, but we'll definitely ask like some of our testers who've been with us for a while, like, hey, take these out, try them out with if they cost this much experience or with this mutation or whatever, and see how they feel. So we try to make sure that we get some eyes and some play on them before we just say, hey, here you go.
Yeah, no, certainly. It's just interesting because there's often, sometimes you go back and forth between taboo and comes off the taboo list, or you change it again. And I like that about the card game. It can be dynamic in that sense, that the card pool changes, or the campaigns change, your design philosophy changes.
Actually, I think a really good example of that, that maybe I've talked about in other interviews, but comes in the form of thinking about higher education and Streetwise in specific. Those were cards that dominated the meta because the meta and the card pool was so much smaller when they came out. And looking at it, it's objectively true. This is a very, very efficient card and probably a bit over the efficiency curve. But we took it off of, we unchained it. We took it off of the taboo list simply because we didn't see it dominating the meta in the same way that it would have 5 years previously.
Yeah, maybe players are bored of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what does the meta mean to you? How would you define that when you're looking at or hearing about the cards?
I mean, that's the thing, is that a meta is just you and the 3 other people, or just you playing around the table. You define the meta, you define what cards you want to play and don't want to play, referring to what I said about Key of Beasts earlier.
Yeah.
Groups will self-regulate. If they're I'm not having fun with that card at the table, they just won't play with it. And so when we're really talking about the meta, that in itself is very subjective. But we have a very lively community that we care about and that we see talking and that we see imagining and going off in such interesting directions for the game, that we do take an eye to that. Okay, stop building so many Mr. Rook decks. We want to see you play Blood of Toth because we actually had a lot of fun with it in playtesting, so here we're going to make sure to give you this adjustment so that you can enjoy it the way it was intended. So a lot of it comes down to us seeing how the community at large is reacting and what they're building with. And that defines a lot of how we approach it.
Makes a lot of sense. It's tough, though. I don't envy that position of trying to cater to everyone with one taboo list, too.
Well, that's the thing, is at the end of the day, I mean, what I can see also with, reception to different campaigns, you cannot cater to everyone. The people who loved Hemlock, some of those people might not love the Drowned City, and vice versa. There are different people have different tastes, and the goal is not to make something that appeals to all people. It is to make many different things that appeal to many different people. You will always, I don't want you to have every campaign be your new favorite campaign. I want you to love and enjoy each campaign, but you're gonna have one favorite campaign at the end of the day, and that's subjective, and that's based on who you are and what you like. So we just want to explore these new spaces, and hopefully you get as excited as we do with wherever we go.
To me, that's the strength of the game 10 years on, is that the new stuff, a new investigator, it doesn't have to be your new favorite thing, because there's so many choices. There's so many different campaigns and scenarios and investigators and player cards. I tend to try to play everything just to see what it's like, and some stuff isn't for me, and that's fine, right? But you've done incredible work to have something for everyone, and I think there's the exploratory process where you find out, do I like this that I like about the game so much? Because some things I've tried out and I was like, I didn't know I was going to have so much fun with this investigator. And some I've been like, well, I got the experience and I'm done with it, and that's fine. But I think that the design of the game that you've continued so well is to continue to uphold that idea. And so thank you so much for being part of the community, and then also continuing that legacy of what Maxine has done for the game before. The game is in a great spot. I'm looking forward to seeing what y'all are working on, what comes out next. Thank you so much for sitting down with me for the last hour and talking. It was great. Any last thoughts that you want to share with anyone, viewers, me, whatever?
I would just say thank you for listening, and as always, it is just an incredible honor to be able to design for this game and to be able to share our weird nightmares with you all as the community.
Yeah, I would say thank you for making the content that you do, and to all the content creators out there. As someone who got to start in that my own self, now I'm on the other side of it, and now I'm a listener and I'm a consumer rather than being part of the process. So thank you for continuing to make good content around this game. So.
No, thank you, and hopefully, we all have our criticisms and we all have our parts that we enjoy, but I hope everyone enjoys the fact that I'm very positive about this game. It's fun, it's great. You guys are doing great, and I've had a great weekend here at ArkhamCon, and that's it. Thank you all, and thank you guys for being here.